Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us today. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. So the format today is we're going to be doing a 101 on media. That's going to be part one, which will run for about 25 minutes, I'd say. You can ask questions at any point during that process by clicking on the Q&A button. And part two will run you through MediaMap, which is this new application we've built to actually deal with the media in the same process that part one talks about.
Yep.
So my name is Granleese. I'm an architectural photographer, formerly an architect, and I'm here with Ben Morgan.
Yes, you can find me anywhere on the web using Ben G. Morgan.
There's a lot of Ben Morgans.
That's right, there are a lot of Ben Morgans. I am a journalist and digital producer, which basically means I can write and I help people to build websites.
And we've got Lauren from Hobart who's just tuned in. Hi, Lauren.
Hi,
Thanks for
Lauren.
letting us know that you're here. If anybody else is just tuned in, send us a Q&A question. Let us know where you're from. And if you've got any questions during the entire broadcast, just please send them over. It's nice to have a little bit of back and forth conversation rather than just us talking. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump over to a little presentation here. So we'll disappear once I share my screen. And now this is a talk which I've adapted from a presentation I've given a couple times in Melbourne. So if you've seen me talk about the Wallaby Lane House at either the Architeam Talks or the Institute of Architects, it's a very similar talk, but we've expanded it and changed it. So please bear with us. There's some new information here, and eventually we'll jump onto MediaMap.
Yep.
So this, sorry, let me just jump over to the presentation itself. Okay, so this presentation, it's about Wallaby Lane House, which is from an architect called Jolyon Robinson. He's an architect up in Noosa, and he's had a lot of success in the media with this project. And we've been tracking it for about 9 months now. And it's been seen by at least 100,000 people. I'm guessing it's probably up around the 150,000 point now. It's been published in magazines, newspapers, blogs. It's really had this life of its own. So it's a good way of looking at how a project moves through the internet and through different publications. It's also a really interesting project because Jolyon's essentially a sole practitioner. He works with his dad, who's semi-retired. His brother comes in every now and then to do some drafting for him, but really he's by himself. So when people talk about media, they're often saying it's only about the large firms, whereas this demonstrates that even if you're a very small firm, you can get your work out into the world and do it quite successfully. So the technique that Jolyon used in this process, and just, sorry, bear with me as I change my screen so I can see questions. There we go. Sorry for that. So the process that Jolyon has used in this to get his project out into the world is a 3-step process, and it goes through creating content, then creating a media kit, and then distribution, which is contacting different publications and asking them if they want to publish a project. So we're going to walk through that process and show you what's involved, and also give you a bit of the background idea of why this is very different to how media probably worked, let's say 20 or 30 years ago. We're really trying to engage with the online world far more now. So let's take a step back and understand how things have changed. This diagram illustrates how the number of publications that architects have access to has changed. Now, even 10 or 20 years ago, we probably had a handful of magazines. Now in Australia, which is a smaller market than the USA, we probably had 4 magazines. But the USA would have had a similar number. There would have been generally less. And what's happened today is that we've got far more publications that want to publish architecture. And that's for a number of reasons. That's because we now have blogs. So there's professional design blogs, things like Arc Daily, which publish in a similar manner to a magazine. But then there's also a whole series of private blogs where anybody now can create their own blog relatively easily and start talking about architecture. And there's a whole realm of those out there as well. We also have access to more international magazines. So rather than it just being a national, I guess having access to national magazines, newspapers, etc., now you can get published on the other side of the world relatively easily. Then on top of all of this, we've got this thing called social media, which basically turns every single individual into their own media network. And they work more like guerrilla warfare, where they have small followings, but they connect to each other. So things share without it being centralized. So the way that our architecture is moving is very different. The other thing to understand is that because we've gone to this global media world, the ability for editors to source projects has changed. What used to happen is a magazine may have sent a writer and a photographer out to an architect to capture a project, and they would have been trying to get an exclusive where they're trying to get unique content, which they sell via this physical product, which you see in a news agency. Now that we've gone global, they're sourcing projects from wide and far, and they can't physically go to the site themselves. They can't just knock on your door or send a photographer easily. Now, the big change here is it means that what they're reliant on is the architect sending them content. And this is probably the number one rule to understand, is that architects have become the content providers. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go forward. But just want to do some media maths here, and this also illustrates this changing environment. And like I said before, if we've got any questions, please jump in at any point via the Q&A sidebar. So the media maths here is, if you think about your potential to get published as an architect, it's really dependent on how many projects publications can publish. So when we're in the print world, a magazine may have had 6 projects per issue, and they may have had 6 issues per year. So the total slots available to them was about 36 projects. If you look at a blog, some of the blogs are publishing up to 10 posts per day. There's 365 days per year. So we end up with about 3,500 projects per year. Then multiply that out by the number of blogs that we have access to now and the number of magazines we have access to now. And the sheer volume of projects being published has drastically increased. So this means that the supply and demand chain between publications and architects has changed as well. What used to happen was that editors were essentially, they had far more projects than they could ever publish, so they could be far more selective. In the modern world, everybody is searching for content. That's the hardest thing to do. If you've ever run a blog, you know that you're constantly searching for the next thing to write about. So as you increase the publication rate, you need more projects. So that's beneficial for architects who, for the ease of access to get published. I guess it's harder in the sense that there's a lot more projects going out into the world. So there's far more noise happening. Have you got anything to add on that, Ben?
Look, everything you've said is kind of 100% true.
I'm going to bring Ben in every now and then because Ben's been on the editor side of this whole process, so he can add some insight into finding projects and I guess the demands of an editor.
Yeah, look, I was an online editor as well, so although I've had a bit of experience in the print realm as well, my focus is definitely on digital. So
out of interest, where were you looking for your projects?
Other websites. So I worked for a company called InDesign in Australia. I was the online editor over all of their websites. I would say, yeah, other websites was always good. There were some that just essentially churned out media releases, media kits of other projects. Our publications tended to go into more detail. So we were happy to publish things that had already been published somewhere else. And again, most websites are happy to do that. But I also got a lot of content from Australian architects who knew and liked our publications, and they sent them to us before they sent them anywhere else. So, you know, there's definite value in being contacted directly as an editor. Very good.
Okay. So this number one rule that I mentioned before is that you are the content provider. So I just want to run through that briefly so that you understand the different players who are involved in architectural media. What an editor essentially does is curate content. So they pull the content together for a magazine or a blog. And then there's these other people who actually create the content, who are the writers. the architectural photographers, and in a much larger part now, the actual architects. So rather than thinking that architects are being featured in a story as if the media is coming to you and knocking on your door, really architects have become this content provider where they commission the architectural photography and they actually provide a lot of the text content, the building block information that goes into any story. So rather than thinking of yourself as you're asking for something, you're actually essential for architectural media to work. And that's a big mindset change, which is why some people get published a lot, because they approach it as if they go to the media saying, hey, I have something really valuable that you need, rather than being, I guess, very meek and feeling like the media is suddenly giving them something.
Yeah.
It's really a trade where the media get your content, which they then sell advertising around. And in return, as the architect, you get exposure, which helps you find new clients.
Yeah. And the right kinds of clients.
And the right type of clients. And that's a big part of media as well, is that it's not just about getting more people walking through your door. By being able to communicate what you do in a better way, you're able to match yourself with much better clients. And that's where you get good results, which allows you to get published more often, because rather than going against your clients where you don't really match, you can actually get the outcomes that both you and the client are sort of striving for.
Yep.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to jump more into the media kit side of things here. So when we photograph a project, what we do is we create a media kit for it. And the reason we started doing this was because we realized that photos aren't a story by themselves. Photos are really powerful, but they need other content to go along with it. And there's 4 types of content that go into any type of story, and they each work in a slightly different way. So we've got architectural photography, which we all know and hopefully love. And photos are instantaneous, so they're incredibly shareable, and they're also emotive. People fall in love with photos or a design because they see it visually. So that's the positives of the photo. The challenge with the photo, however, is that it's very fleeting. The reason they share so well is because you can share it instantly. You send a button, it's off to somebody else. They get a hit within 2 or 3 seconds. They either like it or not, and then they share it onto somebody else. So if you want to get a richer connection with somebody who's reading along in the media, then you need other forms of content, and that's where text comes in. So text allows you to go into more detail and talk about ideas and talk about I guess what I call the building block information of a project. So the building block information is the who, what, where, when, why.
And how.
And how.
As a journalist, we get trained in these things.
And so once you've got that information down, it doesn't matter what the story is. It doesn't matter if a story has been published once or 20 times or 300 times. That building block information is always the same because it's factual. It's things like, what are the building materials? Where is the project located? What was the brief of the project? What were the challenges of the project? And how did you overcome those challenges? So that's text. And I really like text because you can embed ideas in it. Text has a lifespan of about 5 minutes. After about 5 minutes, generally people get distracted and they go off somewhere else. It could even be lower, maybe down to 3 minutes. The third part of content is we've got video. And this is something that isn't used as much as I think it should be because video is incredibly powerful. So video has a lifespan of about 5 minutes as well. But what video allows you to do, apart from replicating a similar experience to, let's say, architectural photography, which would be a video going through the building, is, I think it's more important, is the idea of being able to communicate the people behind the project. So by being able to do what I call talking head videos, where you interview the architect, the client, potentially the builder, other people involved with it, you get this intimate experience. And this is where people get to vicariously build relationships with other people. You probably don't realize this when you're watching talking heads on TV or you're watching the news, but you're starting to build up this relationship with these people that you're watching. And architects can do the same thing. This example, this photo that you're seeing up on the screen, this is Jason Malling, and it's from the Venice Bay Beach House, the Batch, which is from Anthony Martin. And so we recorded this this client, and he's able to speak in a very honest way, which as architects, we're talking about it from the design world, whereas the client's talking about it from a lifestyle perspective, and that's incredibly powerful. The fourth bit of content is audio, which isn't so relevant to architectural media kits, but I just want to include it because it rounds up 4 types of content. And just to say that audio is making a comeback via podcasts, and at the moment it has the longest attention span of any medium, which can last up to 45 minutes to an hour. And as I mentioned before, anybody tuning in who missed the start, if you want to ask questions, you can do so by going up to the top bar. There's a button with 9 little squares. You can click on that and press the Q&A button. That'll allow you to ask us questions during the talk. So this next slide that we've got is an example of a Word doc or Google Doc media kit. And this is what Jolien used to get his project published. And what a media kit essentially does is try to preempt all the typical questions that the media will need to ask about your project, and then write that down beforehand, and also include images, etc. And you can think of this as all the building block material that a journalist will need to write a story. And if they don't have this, then they're going to have to get it from somewhere.
Yeah, basically what you're trying to do is minimize the amount of back and forth that you have to do with an editor, because particularly with online editors, they really only want to go back to you once to say, hey, is it okay that I publish this? I don't need anything else.
Yeah, so and the idea here is if you're making the editor's life easier, then that increases your chances of getting published, because you become a good media citizen, as I like to describe it, but you're also cutting down time. So the typical scenario occurs where you've either approached the media or the media's approached you, you're trying to negotiate about getting something published, and there's all these back and forth emails. And you say, hey, I've got these photos ready to be done. And then the editor says, that's great. We need an architect's statement describing the project. Then the editor sits there and waits for 1 or 2 weeks, then sends up a follow-up email. As the architect, you're busy doing other things. You've probably got deadlines of your own. The editor's waiting, misses the deadline. That's how people become bad media contacts. And what you're doing is you're basically making the whole media process much harder than it needs to be. By creating the media kit, you streamline everything, and you can basically take this package of goodness to an editor and say, here you go, would you like to write a story? And for them, they're going, wow, I don't have to stuff around here anymore.
Yep.
I can get on and write this story.
And for online publications, that could be as simple as a lot of online publications do just print the architect's statement and put the images up, or it can just provide print editors with everything they need to then send a writer out who will interview you and do a more in-depth story.
Yeah, so I'm going to skip over most of the text content in the media kit because it's pretty self-explanatory once you see the template, things like building details or building materials. The 2 things I do want to cover though is the initial project description, which I describe as the first 300 words. They're important because a lot of media now is just copying and pasting that text.
Yep.
So getting that right is valuable. The other part which I think is really valuable is the project brief, the challenges of the brief, and the response to the brief. And this is classic storytelling. So if you think about Lord of the Rings uses the same approach. So Frodo starts off and he's got this big mission that he's been given. This is the brief. Along the way, Frodo has to fight dragons, and it looks like Frodo's going to lose, and it's really challenging and hard. Well, this is the challenges of a design project, and it's things like town planning, trying to fit things into a tight space. And then in the end, Frodo wins. Everybody, there's a big hurrah, and that's a classic story. And it's the same with architecture. And the reason that's a nice way of talking about a building is by starting off with the brief, you're using the client's words rather than talking about it from an architect's perspective, because we all have a tendency to talk in architect speak, which doesn't really resonate with most media, and it doesn't resonate with most clients. So it's a nice way of being able to talk about a project without getting stuck in the typical traps. Let's move to the next slide. What stops architects from getting published, Ben?
I think what we just spoke about, so not giving editors everything they need, having to go back and forth. But look, a big one is not having the content, pretty much. So not having images pretty much guarantees that you won't get published, no matter how good you are at writing about your project. And then on top of that, not having a good description of the project that captures editors' attention.
Yeah, and I'd also say not being proactive. So if you're thinking that an editor will come and tap on your shoulder, or one day walk into your office and say, we love your project, we want to photograph it and publish it, it's not really how it works. The people getting, especially online, so the people getting published are really taking their stuff out to editors and saying, hey, we've got something ready for you to use, because the editor just physically won't know that your project exists in a lot of cases. And I think the other one is slow response times.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So this is talking about why you use a media kit, because it essentially reduces your response time. This becomes critical when you're dealing with newspapers. I was told by a writer that they use a 12-hour rule. And this is because they literally have these deadlines, which is we need to publish tomorrow. So when they go out to somebody, if you're getting a phone call from an editor and saying, hey, we need a statement, it's probably because they need to publish. It's not something that can wait until tomorrow or the next week. So by having a media kit, you press respond on the email, you put in your media kit, and you're done. And the beauty of that is that because you've already thought about it, because you've written all the text in well in advance, you're not under pressure to write something which is going to go out to print, which is where people get nervous and worried about it. You can actually think about it when everything is slow and calm, and then send it out to the world feeling that it's been polished.
And then you actually become a preferred supplier. As much as most editors would like to think that they're very fair, it's if you have a firm that is really responsive to things, they're going to come back to you, and maybe for different things next time, maybe for comment on a larger political story or whatever it happens to be.
And also the opposite happens. If you become a bad supplier where it's just hard to work with, it's like anybody, people are human beings. They're going to go, I could go to that architect and they've got an amazing project, but it's going to take up this amount of time. Whereas I know if I go to this other person, I can get that project before the deadline. So who are they going to choose? So the final stage in this process is distribution. And distribution is about being proactive and going out to the media and saying, hey, we've got this content. Now, this is how most people start off with that approach, which is to use an Excel spreadsheet, and they start to collect the names of journalists that they know. This one's probably a little bit bigger than the usual one. This is what we started off with as a basis of MediaMap. And we wanted to track more information. We wanted to see things like audience sizes, Twitter followers, and be able to really make, I guess, decisions about the media based on the outcome that it will give back to the architect. But this is how most people start, and we'll show you the MediaMap version of that quite soon. But what you do is everyone's got their own strategies on how to do this. Some people want to go out to magazines first. Other people want to go out to blogs first. One of the big challenges with all of that is that a lot of that is guesswork, and it's what people have done in the past or what they've been told to do. Once you get into the numbers and data, you can actually start to track sequences, and that's a big mission, I think, for MediaMap, is to be able to look at architectural projects and see how they move through space. So speaking about moving through space, we did that with the Wallaby Lane house to look at where it was popping up and how it was being shared from one publication to the next. So I'll just run through this rather quickly, but Wallaby Lane, we photographed this last February up in Noosa, and we started off with social media. And we took a photo of that, we put it on Instagram, and the reason we do that is because editors are reading along and you're seeding an idea to the media that here is a project which is soon going to have content ready. Then Jolien created a media kit. We put our photos into it. He added the text, and we were discussing which way we were going to do this. I was saying, let's go out to the magazines first because they'll want an exclusive. And before he got that email, he'd already sent it off to Contemporist.
Which is an online publication for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, online publication. It's a big publication, which is kind of fascinating because this project then became this live experiment to see what happens if you go out to blogs first. What we saw, and there's a bit of guesswork going on here though, is that within about 4 days, about 4 other major blogs, ArcDaily, Architizer, eArchitect. They all approached Jolien after seeing it on Contemporarist and said, we want this too. And my hypothesis here is the reason they did that is because it got about 500 Facebook likes within about 2 or 3 days, which was an indicator that this project was hot, which meant that they wanted it because it's not so much about exclusives. What it's about is click advertising. So they need to get traffic past their site. So if they see another project is hot somewhere else, there's no reason why they wouldn't want to get that as well, because they'll generate an income out of it. So that kept moving through these different major blogs, and then it jumped onto some interesting places like large Instagram accounts. And this is a new type of media, but they've got huge followings. And so this one is called Australian Architecture, and there's probably similar versions of this all around the world. It's got thousands and thousands of people following along. Got picked up on that, and they published several photos. Then eventually it came back to the local newspaper. And this is where it gets really interesting, because people often talk about the famous in Japan syndrome with media where, well, what does it matter if you're getting published somewhere on the other side of the world? And the reason it worked was because the newspapers saw this as this sort of local area with this project, which is getting publicity all around the world as the story itself. And the headline is catching world's attention. So you can't really get much better than that.
No.
And that's where the reason that's the best publicity out of this entire cycle is because it's local publicity. That's where Jolien will start to find new clients. Not to mention that because all the other blogs talking about him, if you start to type his name into Google and things like that, he's popping up much higher now, and people can find out about his projects much easier. So that's some of the large benefits. It's about building this footprint so that if people are starting to type in architecture in your local area, you've suddenly got all these blog posts around the world. What also happens from that is that you'll end up with a series of 2nd and 3rd tier blogs. And the way I describe those tiers is basically that audience size drops. So if we're talking about ArcDaily, on a post, you might get 13,000 people read each post. And then you might drop off to a smaller blog, which might have 2,000 or 3,000 people. And then you'll drop off to posts, blogs, which have, 20, 50 people. But they all build up this sort of layers upon layers of media around a project. And eventually Jolien picked up a national magazine, multi-page spread. I think it's going to be somewhere between 4 to 10 pages. And this is interesting because most people would say that a magazine wouldn't want to publish this project. But in reality, what's happened is the project has already been tested in other media to be popular. So it's actually a really good thing for a magazine to use. In this case, what they did, though, is they asked for the photos to be retaken so that it had landscaping. And what that meant is it's the same project, but now they've got different content to use to talk about it.
Absolutely. Just because a story has been published in one place doesn't mean there isn't another story to be had somewhere else. And particularly with the different kinds of media, online will print published projects that have been published elsewhere because they know that they're hitting potentially different people. Magazines will often be reluctant to print something that's been printed elsewhere, but they don't care about online media anymore either. So it's very interesting.
And then there's a whole series of secondary level magazines, things like kitchen magazines and bathroom magazines that come out once a year. And so they're looking for the stories from other sources to be able to put in their magazine. And eventually you have books and TV shows as well. And what my hypothesis with this whole process is what's really happening here is that the project is moving from very fast media to very slow media. So social media is instantaneous. Literally, people can walk down the street and take a photo of a project and it's out into the world. Then it goes through these fast blogs, which are writing articles of maybe one paragraph, which is very small content, but with a few photos. Then it goes to newspapers, magazines, where they're starting to build up bigger and larger, more in-depth stories. And eventually you get down to books, which obviously take years to make sometimes. And you also end up with TV shows, which have very long schedules. So that's the idea of how these projects are moving through space. And the rule here is that for architects, it's not about getting published once anymore. It's really about creating a sequence where a project flows through multiple different mediums. And that's our last slide. We're going to jump on and show you a demo of MediaMap. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions?
We do have a question there.
What is the question?
How many months did this growth take from initial social media posting?
The social media obviously went out on the day we photographed it. Then from memory, it would have been a couple of weeks until it went out to Contemporist. So basically it's the time it takes for you to write the document. The overall time period, it started in February, we're in December now, so we're getting close to 10 months. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting aspect as well, because it maximizes the value you get out of the content you're creating. So rather than photographing, let's say 4 different projects, it's much better to photograph one project really, really well, make all this additional content, things like behind the scenes videos and interviews with the clients, provide all this content that you can use for it, and then see how far you can get it published. Because you also end up with this thing called repetition. And repetition is classic advertising. People remember projects that they've seen over and over and over again. So if you get a project that's only been published once, even if it's in a really, really large magazine, chances are people will forget about it and they don't know about it. Mm-hmm. Whereas this going through multiple mediums over and over again, it goes into the collective consciousness. Mm. And so when I talk to people now, I show them this project and I say, do you know this project? They go, oh yeah, I do. Yeah. And that's the ultimate success of, in my view, of getting out to the media well for architects.
It's essentially 10 months of exposure, and then in the print publications it can keep going.
Very good. Good. So Jessica just says she's found where the Q&A section is. That's great.
That was a while ago now.
For anybody else, top bar, there's a little button with 9 little squares. You can click on that, and there's a Q&A button below that, and it should open a sidebar.
And so that's after you've clicked on the video in the top corner if you've just...
Oh, you have to do that well.
Yes, first.
We apologise on Google's behalf for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our screen and show you MediaMap.
And us for a second.
And us for a second. And let me just change. Bear with me. Do we have any more questions, Ben?
Yeah, well, now's the time to fire across any questions if you have them. Although with a 40-second delay, we may be up and running by then.
Let me just open this up. We're going to jump into MediaMap. Okay, so we're jumping into MediaMap. So this is a project that we've been working on for about 9 months as well. And this is a media tool that I've wanted to build for a long time, which basically takes that process that we just showed you about building media kits and going out to the media and making it into an online tool. Present. Just making sure everybody can see that screen. So MediaMap is a few things, but we'll start off with the most basic, which is it's a database of the world's architectural media. So the concept here is that to be able to get published as much as you can, you need to know what your options are. So most people start off with knowing their local publications, but then they sort of forget that there's all these other people who are wanting all this content, all these things about their own projects. So if you know more publications, you increase your ability to flow a project through the world. Yeah. And you can also take a few hits on the chin as well when people will reject your projects.
Get used to the rejection.
get used to the rejection, but a good project will flow. But there's always somebody who's looking for a particular project for a particular reason. And the opposite is true as well. There's lots of publications who may have already published a project similar to the one that you've just photographed. Yeah. So it's not so much a personal indication of your project. Sometimes it's just, look, we'd love to publish it, but we can't do that right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in a really basic way, what we can do here is we can type into MediaMap and find all sorts of media. And we've already put in about 900 publications, and we've got about another 900 people. And we're trying to track all this information in a smarter way than that Excel spreadsheet that I showed you before. And we're trying to create something which is a live document. So the problem with an Excel spreadsheet is as soon as you do all your research, it's out of date. especially if you're trying to do things like track audience sizes or Twitter accounts and so forth. But the main way that you would use this, and we've pulled up the Arc Daily page here, and we're showing the different people behind Arc Daily so that you can know who the editors are and who the writers are, so you can contact them directly if you've already built a relationship with them. But they've got things like online submission forms. So in a really basic sense, you can go through the web now, and Arc Daily, in this example, is asking for projects. So we're trying to track all that sort of information. We're also trying to filter publications and make it useful for a specific project, which I'll show you a little bit more detail soon. But you can create your own publications here by going up to Add Publication. And the idea here is that this is a crowdsourced database. And so all the users who are on board, they can add publications, they can add people, they can update details. So when an editor moves from one publication to the next, anybody can update that. We're also getting emails already from publications saying, hey, can you update our details? We're changing somebody at the end of the year. And so it's a good way of a centralized point of information. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to go through the process of creating a new publication, just to say that you can create them. What I am going to do, though, is create a media kit in this whole process. So I'm just going to go Add New Project. And I'm going to call this My Lovely Project and go Create. And this is then going to ask me what template I want to use. Generally, you're going to want to use an architecture project. And this is all those questions that were laid out in that Word doc before, just formatted in a better and smarter way. Digitally, yeah, and because you can share all of this online. Now I'm just going to do this very briefly. I'm going to change the name. My little project. There you go, save. A lot of this is self-explanatory. That's why I don't want to spend too much time doing this. I'm just going to make it look pretty. We can do a Hello House. This is an upcoming project which we'll be sharing on MediaMap soon. And I obviously chose a really big picture, but that's a Hello House over in Melbourne. I'm going to run you through some of the more important features here. So at the top, we've got a few tabs, and this mimics that concept of the different content types. So we've got images, video, and text. Images, I know there's a few architectural photographers who are tuning in. The important thing here is that you can upload high-res images, and you can theoretically go up to 50 megabytes per photo, which should be more than enough. I would recommend 5 to 10 megabytes just for upload speeds. So even though technically it can handle it, depending on your internet connection, it could take a long time to upload. But 5 to 10 megabytes should allow you to do up to A4 prints and potentially up to A3 double spreads. But you can upload them. If anybody's used WordPress, it's the same backend format. You can add photos in here. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to skip past it all. We've got video sections. You can add in YouTube clips quite easily there. And we've got text sections, which go through Q&As, and it's got pre-formatted questions there so that you don't really have to think about what you have to send the media. You're just responding to questions in a factual way. The idea here is we're trying to get away from people having to be expert writers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unlike Ben, who is an expert.
Yeah, that is really the thing. You know, we're still used to getting content from people who aren't professional writers. So as long as you've got those building blocks, as you say, we are more than happy. In fact, you know, if you're trying to write an in-depth story, you'll contact someone and get even more information.
So I'm not going to go through all the details here, as I said. I just want to show you jump onto some of the media campaign features, because that's more of the advanced stuff which I think people are interested in. I'll also show you how to share it. So the idea is that you can share this media kit with other people. You can also control what level access they have to the photos. So I can choose to send a low-res version or a high-res version. And if I click on that button, we get the online version, which we can send out to editors. And that works on mobile phones and things like that. The idea here is that we want people to be able to access our information as easily as possible and control who has access to different things. Now, I might actually just upload a photo very quickly to show you that process. So let's just choose one. Let me just choose anything that we've got.
The beautiful Hello House again.
Sorry, that screen may have gone a little bit wild there on the screencast. I'm going to select that. We're going to click the update button. You can just see that it's updating the page now. We're going to close, and here's the image. And we can put captions in here as well. But as you can see, because you're logged in, you can download the low-res version or the high-res versions. When you go over to the media kit for the editors, when you go over to the images now, you can see that you've only given them access to the low-res version. And I think that's pretty important for photographers. You can also add an attribution as well. Now, I'm going to leave that there and jump onto this concept of media campaigns. So media campaigns is this idea that for each project, you're probably going to want to approach different publications and approach them in different sequences. The way you do this here is for each media kit, you can go add media. And this is a slow way, by the way. I'll show you a template in a moment, but we're going to go search media database. And we can click here and say, show me all the architectural publications in the system. And we'll get this list. And what we can do now is we can run through this list. And if we click on the name, we'll get a preview of what it is. We'll get an idea of things like the Twitter followers to give you an idea of the size of it. And we can either choose to add or reject. So let's say I want to reject that. And I can quickly go through the list and figure out who I like and who I don't like. And I'm just going to go add, add, add. And then if I go back to my media campaign, this starts to give me a list of the publications that I'm going to approach. I'm going to actually load a template now because this is the faster way of doing it. When the first time you go through this, it's probably worth clicking through all 700 publications just to learn who they are. But once you do that twice, it gets boring really quickly. And so what you can do is create
hang on, are you saying editors are boring? I take offense to that.
Instead, what you can do is you can go over here and just load a template. And this will give you a list of, let's say, the largest major blogs in the world, which we've curated here and we'll update as we go along in time. But I'm just going to load and replace. And now when I go back to my campaign, I've actually got a list of all the publications that I want to approach. And in here, I can now press the send button. Let's do Arc Daily. And it's going to tell me the online submission, or it's going to tell me the different people involved with this publication. And if I wanted to send them an email, I could do that by clicking on this button. And what this is going to do is it's going to open up my email client, and it's going to put in a default email which you can change via some settings, and it's going to include a link to your media kit. So if you want to change those email settings, you can do that here, and you can choose the quality of images that you want to send with that. Just be aware, different email clients have some weird little bugs going on when your default message goes in there. It sort of condenses some of the text, but we'll be fixing that next year, hopefully, once we work through Gmail and Outlook and so forth. As you go out to each publication, you can just keep track of that, and you can say, okay, I've contacted that one. This one's not interested, and eventually you'll get a list of published publications. This is going to become more useful as we start to add in powerful statistics. So we can start to say, hey, we know how many people read an average article on eArchitect. So you'll be able to see that my project has been viewed by a total number of people, which is, let's say, 57,000 people. That's in the works for early 2015. And I'll just show you the advanced section. So if you click on this button here, you can keep track of things which become more detailed. So let's say publisher is going to go out on a certain date. You can choose to keep track of that for your own notes. There's also a notes section here. And maybe the editor needs an additional photo or so forth. Yep. This becomes important when you're going into a lot of different media, and especially if you're trying to run multiple projects at once. So for the architectural photographers out there, if you're doing this on behalf of your clients, trying to run 3 or 4 projects at the same time gets confusing very quickly. So that's what we're trying to solve here. We're trying to streamline that whole process. You've also got a lovely little divider button. If you want to, you can type in here and say, okay, this is blogs, etc. And that is the essence of the application.
Yes.
It's very quickly run through, but we've tried to make it as simple as possible. Does anybody have any questions?
I haven't got any come through yet, but please ask questions. Anything, no matter how silly you think it might be.
I'm conscious that we're coming up to 10 o'clock, so I'm sure people will be getting ready to go back to work. But please ask any questions that you have.
We've got a bit of delay, so...
40 minutes. Do you have any questions, Ben?
Do I have any questions? See, it's really hard when you're this close to a project. We're
waiting for
sit here for 40 seconds.
Yeah, we'll sit here for 40 seconds and wait for the projects.
But please, look, ask any questions at all, whether it's about the pricing or...
Yeah, I guess we can, while we're waiting for any questions that come up.
I'll come back to me.
And we'll come back to the video. Here we are. While we're waiting for questions, I guess we can do the roundup stuff, which is, if you want to go try out MediaMap, we'd love you to do it. We're in the beta phase at the moment. So you can go use it as a 7-day trial. Thank you everybody who has already signed up. Yep. That's been fantastic. And we also love your feedback, because you're helping us figure out how you use it, what you want to do with it, and the new features that we can add in.
And we're here to help as well. So get in touch if you've got any questions at all.
Yeah, if you're struggling with how to build media kits and so forth, please just send us an email, because we're trying to get people on board and get use out of this new application.
Yeah. We've got a question there from Patrick, who's asking about the stats section.
Yeah, sure. So the stats section at the moment is pretty limited. So at the moment, what we've got is some basic page views. Obviously, this is a brand new media kit, so you won't see anything there. I might pull up Wallaby Lane to show you that one.
I'll need to see that.
And let me...
We'll just share our screen. We're looking at it, but we just realised you're not.
So we've got the stats page here at the moment. So at the moment, this is pretty limited stats. What this is showing you is the number of people who have seen the media kit, in the same way that the number of people who have seen a website page. The campaign stats, which is coming soon, though, that's where we're going to get into far more detail, and we're going to be looking at things like, what is the potential audience of your media campaign? Now, the reason we haven't built that in yet is because we need to plug into a pretty expensive database, which is provided by somebody else who measures statistics on other websites. Things like, it'll tell us that 20 million people go to this website versus 10 million on another website. Once we can collate that data, then we can give you a total estimate of the number of people you might be able to get published with, and also create calculations saying, well, you've been published by 4 publications. Here's the total estimate of the number of people you've been seen by.
Yeah.
And that's where this gets interesting, because we can start to compare different publications. We can start to compare different projects and say things like, well, in 2014, the most seen project was X.
Yeah.
Or if you're in an office where you've got multiple projects running through the year, you can start to say, okay, this project outperformed the other ones.
And then you can do an analysis on why you think that might be.
Yeah, you might do a trial where you go to the magazines first versus going to blogs first, and then you can compare the two. Yeah. And I think that's for me personally, being a data person, that's where we start to get away from assumptions, and we get to be able to analyze how architecture is really working in publicity and media world.
Yep. Okay, we've got another question here from Dish Designer. Dish Designer said, have you investigated connecting media kits to worldwide metadata standards like IPTC for photos or OAI Open Archives to make publication easier on the editor end, or are media kits self-contained packages with such information embedded?
No. Well, okay. So yes and no. So there's a whole series of external connections we'd like to make. Sorry, we're just coming back to us. So there's a whole series of external connections we'd like to make with all sorts of things. So if we could do something like a button which says submit it to this website, especially self-submission websites. So imagine something like House, where you've already got all these photos, all this content, you press a button and it sends it off to them. So yes, we'd like to do that. We've got to make sure that we get a community using the platform first and that it's doing the essential core value.
Yeah.
After that, then we can do all sorts of things and we can keep building upon it.
And there are a lot of things that we could do, so we're excited about all these things.
Yeah, like one of the big exciting things that I see as a potential thing is when you send a media kit to an editor, being able to find out if the editor has actually viewed your media kit. And so you can get an email saying, hey, John Smith just checked out your media kit, or if the editor downloads a photo. So for example, tracking which photos are being downloaded. And we should be able to do that so that you can say, okay, out of the 20 photos in the media kit, this one is getting downloaded the most. So I think that's interesting as well.
It's all about giving architects useful data on how the media is using their content.
Yeah, and giving, like, I think being able to get live updates so that you're getting a little email saying, hey, somebody is interested or not interested. And also tying, having a little button top of the media kit where an editor can just go, I'm interested, not interested, and it's updating your campaign straight away.
Yeah. So lots of things in the works. We've got a comment certainly here. A comment from Yelena.
Hi, Yelena. And a question just coming in, how simple and streamlined the interface looks, really well thought through for the end user, especially stats section. Can't wait to start using it.
Yeah, the checks in the mail.
Yeah, thanks. Look, we're trying to make it simple. Obviously, trying to combine 2,000 publications with data with this thing that makes a media kit it's a complicated little piece of software to make, especially because we're doing it for a small audience. That's one of the reasons why we need everyone's support, is because we're not a Google.
No.
And Google has millions of dollars to make these things, and nobody would make this for the architectural community. And we can only do it by getting people on board and them supporting us. And
that's the other thing to remember, is that Nick's has been a practicing architect and is an architectural photographer, and I've been an editor for 10 years. So I think we're specifically within the architecture and design fields, and so that's what we want to do. We're here to do that for you guys. And
we've got a vested interest because we're trying to solve our pain point. And so trying to manage this process is the struggle that I have on a daily basis. Yeah. So I'm just trying to streamline that. But that said, the most important thing now is for people to tell us where it's working for them or where it's not working for them. And so really constructive feedback, like, I didn't understand how this bit worked, or I'd really wish it could do that. Now, obviously, we don't want to build every feature because then it becomes bloated, and that's a terrible product
for anyone. Yeah.
But we do want to figure out the things that it's just missing, or the things where something, there's going to be light bulb moments where somebody says, what if it could do that?
Yeah.
And I think that's where it becomes exciting as well.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions?
Any more questions? So we're coming up to 10 o'clock, so this is your last chance.
We'll wait a little bit just for that 40-second delay.
40-second delay. And of course, you can send us an email if you want to ask a question.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, please feel free to email us.
Yeah, you can send it over to support@mediamap.co. And I'm just watching the delayed replay. We've got a second screen set up here so we can see what's going on.
Do you speak out the pricing to you?
Look, if you want to go check out the pricing, go check out MediaMap.co. Up until December, we've got what's called the early adopter plan, which basically means we give away cheap plans with lots of features because we want to get users on board so that we can see how they're using it, and so that we can build, I guess. Well, I guess we're giving away a good deal to the people who are supporting us early on.
Absolutely.
After the 31st of December, we'll move to our normal pricing. And so again, that's an incentive to get on board early.
Yeah.
rather than sort of waiting and because we basically need support. We're trying to get up to 100 users, and once we hit that point, then we've got this beautiful sustainable group, and we can keep building features without starving. And
but we're not a charity case.
No. But without the software taking a long time to get to that point of sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, any other final questions? Looks like you're all very satisfied or ready for a coffee.
I think that's it. I think everybody's run away. So thanks, everyone. Again, if you have any questions, just send us an email. We'll see you all later.
Bye.